Alright, so how to learn a new language from zero, scratch, all the way up to fluency. Essentially what I'm doing here is sharing with you my strategy that I have developed for learning a new language. And this works for any language, but specifically I've used it and I'm using it for Spanish, French, and Mandarin. So my strategy here is essentially 4 steps, and I started with Duolingo, and I'm using this for Mandarin right now. And this is like my immersion strategy, and I use it in the same way that it's the same idea as like when kids are learning before they go to school, where they are listening and speaking and maybe have a little bit of practice with their parents. And so I use it as my exposure to the language, and I really don't worry about like grammar or even like I don't worry much at all about my language at this stage. I'm just trying to acquire as much vocabulary as possible, produce sounds as correctly as possible, and even like not even that. I'm not even too worried about correct pronunciation at this point. Like, I want to be understood, but I'm not worried about refining my accent at this point. I want to learn, to speak well, but just like little kids, they speak and sometimes you're like, huh? What did you say? Like, they still have to be corrected. And so it's important, but it's not refined. And so this is the immersion stage, and I use Duolingo, so the whole Duolingo tree. I've done this for Spanish, I've done this for French, I've done the whole thing, and it was quite a few years ago when I did it for Spanish and French, and it's really cool seeing how Duolingo has progressed over the years, using it for Mandarin and also using it for a language so different than French and Spanish, like Mandarin. And so that is the immersion there that I'm using. Now, I also use a character practice book, and that I use, I'm not great about using it, to be honest, but I do use it, and it is really helpful. And as my writing practice, I've done some journaling. When I say journaling, I mean like writing out that date, writing a few sentences with words that I know that I can use, like how are you, and like things like that. And so I do that sometimes. Mostly I'm using Duolingo at this stage, the beginner stage. Now, for the intermediate stage, and this is where my French is right now, my strategy for that, so this is step 2. And that is going through a grammar workbook, a course, something where this is now time for grammar and refinement, and now I have exposure and I have vocabulary and I have experience using the language in speaking and a little bit of exposure to reading and writing, but mostly right now I need to learn these grammar concepts. So this approach I really, really like, because a lot of students, when they go into classes, they fail or they struggle because they are skipping the exposure step and they go straight into the grammar step. Well, it's really, really difficult to learn language that way through just grammar, and that's why classes get a lot of hate, because they're like, I can't learn this way, like how am I gonna, I'm not using the language like I did in my native language. So that exposure stage, which takes like a year, maybe 2 years, depending on how much you practice. You do it faster potentially, but I think I'll take a year or 2. I've already taken a year for my Mandarin, but that's my progress, that's how long it takes me. And also because I have 4 languages, so it slows you down a bit. If you're only learning 1 language, I'm learning 3. I have 4 including English, and then we'll get to Spanish in a minute. A few minutes. But so for French, I have that grammar workbook, and then I also am taking a class, and that is college class. That is like 1 college level French level 1, very beginning. And it is mostly review. It's kind of review, but it's like, even though it's review, even though I've seen it before, I really don't feel confident in my French grammar abilities and my writing abilities and all of that. So that's why I said, I'm going to take this course. Now that I have that exposure, I'm going to really get it down. So I'm in like kindergarten for French, like maybe first grade. And that second stage is practicing, like explicit practice like that. Now, that's not all that I do, because that would be just like, that'd be really boring, right? To just do like all the time, just writing. I'm still using different immersion techniques. I'm beyond Duolingo with my French, like that is below my level, and that would also be boring. And I am doing things like conversation practice with a tutor. I am doing things like reading. I have some comics that I read in French, and those are fun, and I've read them once. I'm going to go back, I think, and read them again, maybe even do like some translation practice, like experiment with it. And that's really big too. It's just experimentation. So that's stage 2. Stage 2 is the grammar aspect, some kind of course, some kind of like real structure where you get some serious practice in with the formation and that structure of the language. Now, stage 3, that is fluency practice, and I guess I don't really have anything in stage 3 right now. My Spanish is kind of beyond that. And stage 3 is that fluency practice, and that is getting as much reading and writing and speaking and listening as possible, and also revisiting some of those grammar concepts, and especially the more advanced grammar concepts, but also like don't neglect those beginner concepts either, because even though you've learned them, you practice them, you even took courses and ace tests, that doesn't mean that you don't have to practice them anymore. You still need to practice them because, well, 1, because you forget them, but 2, because they look different when you go back and practice them from a more advanced level. You understand them differently when you go back to them. So it's really important to spiral through your content like that to your practice and your different information that you have. And so that's stage 3, is reading, writing, speaking, listening as much as possible. This is the advanced stage. This is where you are reading like short stories, maybe you have a novel, you break it up, you're reading that. You're writing maybe responses to your reading, or you're writing journaling, you're doing that daily, you're doing something that is really engaging your brain and interacting with that language at that deeper level. And then 4, okay, so 4 is conversation. Now, conversation really begins at level 1 as part of Duolingo. You have a little bit of speaking, like repeat after me, and that's part of it too. But speaking at that level 4, like in these levels, they're separate, but they're levels, but they're also just different techniques, and they integrate throughout. So it's not necessarily like you do one before you start the other. They'll overlap a little bit, and how they overlap will depend on you as a language learner, and how you study, how you prefer to study, what you need, your timeline, all of these different circumstances. And so 4 is conversation, and conversation meaning like conversation that is really productive. And I do this with tutors on italki. I love going on there and finding my teachers on there, and conversation practice, because it's really effective with my time. And I've tried like in the past just conversation partners, and I don't like it as much because it is not as efficient with my time. And there's like a trade-off, this and that. It's cheaper, of course, so if that is the only way that you can do it, or that is more important to you, to have something that's inexpensive, by all means do that. But if you can work with a teacher, I would work with a teacher, because you have an entire hour or however long dedicated to you. You have someone who is experienced in not just that language, but in teaching that language, even if they're not actually teaching you that language, like saying this is a grammar concept, this is what this means, this is how you use it. Even if they are just talking to you, a good teacher will correct your pronunciation, will guide you, they'll have the vocabulary for you, they might say, okay, this is how you say it, they'll be faster to respond, and their energy going into that meeting is like, let's go, let's do this, let me provide value for your time, versus a conversation partner. It's kind of like, you know, like walking through the park. It's like not necessarily as efficient. And so that's kind of where that stands there. And of course, if you do want, like when you work with a teacher and you're like, okay, do what you do, trust you, you're the expert, I need practice conversation, I know, but if you notice something else I need, please tell me and like target it. So what that does, and that's usually what I do, is then you say, okay, I'm doing conversation, but then they might say, hey, you really don't know the difference between ser and estar in Spanish. And they'd be like, well, we need to practice this, like you need to do this. So that's that other component, is they can target different areas, or they'd be like, man, you mispronounce this word every single time, and then the sound in each of these words, they can identify things like that because they have teaching experience. They are teachers, not just people who speak the language. And yes, so there's that. And so with that component, that speaking component, again, don't have to wait until like the end. Definitely don't wait until the end. So with my French, I'm doing that now, even though I'm in stage 2 with my French, I'm adding pieces of that in. And my Mandarin, I tried some lessons in Mandarin, and they were like lessons, and I needed that at the time, but now I think I want to just focus on my vocabulary and Duolingo, get that done, my practice on my own. And then when I get to the conversation level, then I want to practice more with tutors, like with my French, that conversation level. For my Spanish, that like conversation, I guess you can always do 3 and 4, like you can always do all, well, maybe not one not so much, but you have exposure, but 3 and 4, like you can always do those. And 2, I guess, do like grammar practice, yeah, you can always do that. Well, you get to a point though where you're like, I know all this, but that's, you don't know everything. You don't. Even when you think you do, you don't. And trust me, I know it. No, yeah, there's always something that you can go back and practice, but 3 and 4 you can do all the time. So my Spanish, 3 and 4. And that looks like, I'm still figuring out in this moment what that looks like, but I do sometimes practice with a tutor, like speaking conversation. I struggle more with the like advanced literature and analytical conversations, discussions about that literature and things like that. And like basic conversation, I don't have a problem with. I can go, like, you could drop me in a Spanish speaking country and I'd be fine. But with the more advanced discussions, I do struggle a bit with those. Sometimes, like, I have to think quite a bit for that, and I don't always have the vocabulary I need. Sometimes I have to use different words. So that's why I'm there, and that's somewhere in there that I'm working out. So I'll give you guys an update maybe if I figure out what I'm doing with that. But that is the 4-step process. So 1, exposure. I like using Duolingo. By all means, use whatever you like. I have used Duolingo. I like it, and it works for me. Step 2 is practice through structured course, through a workbook, whatever you can get your hands on. Practice, get busy with grammar and structure. Step 3 is reading, writing, speaking, listening as much as possible, and especially reading and writing. And at that stage, you are, again, reading short stories, reading news articles, reading anything, and writing. That's processing that. Oh, and don't forget step 3, and I think this is crucial. You need feedback. So this is where you can work with a tutor too, and you can say, hey, can you correct my writing, and get feedback on it, because that's how you're going to really improve. The same with the speaking. So with step 4, with that speaking, that feedback is going to move you along so much faster, and it's going to just make you just so much better and such a fluent speaker, and you're going to be able to do so much more with your language with that feedback and then application of, you know, the feedback, like putting your effort into make those corrections. All right, so that's how you can move from 0 to fluent in any language. And that's it. I'll see you guys back here next Tuesday. Bye, guys.